Välkommen alla sammen. Really important video today speaking about Thor and his actual historical function in the Norse religion. Ancient gods, they were not just worshipped randomly because humans like to get the fanboy devotion experience to a superhuman rock star of a god. This is not what paganism has ever been about. Any practice or worship that is done in any pagan religion was done for a very specific purpose. And I really see the most ridiculous thing from the modern cringe pagans, especially about Thor, treating their god like some Jesus rock star, crying up to the sky, or their altar begging Thor to help them, I don't know, in a job interview or with a bully at school. Or I've seen people literally begging Thor to help them with depression or weight loss. And I know all of you guys watching this video don't need to hear any of this, you know better. But what I'm going to do in this video is go over the historical sources and tell you exactly why Thor was invoked in ancient times, and this is going to help you understand what this spiritual energy, what this being is that we really call Thor. So if you haven't watched my video yet about what Thor really represents, that one will be below. Watch that, it'll make a lot more sense, especially towards the end of the video. But onto the sources. I'm going over everything that gives us a clue as to why Thor was worshipped, prayed to, sacrificed to, whatever. First source, Adam of Bremen, a priest in the 1000s, writing about the pagan temple at Uppsala in Sweden. This source is recording pagans in pagan times. So some of the other sources that I'm about to speak about are kind of vague from later on in time, but Adam of Bremen's account is really the most reliable source we have of this. And you see here, it speaks about reasons why each god in the temple would be giving an offering to, and Thor there is given an offering to for plague or famine, defense against that. Very simple, and this is what you're going to see in most of the sources that I'm going over now, that Thor has to do with good health, protection, not just for humans, but for kind of the whole collective area. Also in this source, though, before I go on, you can see here that Thor presides over the air, which governs thunder and lightning, the winds and the rains. Most of you know that, but also fair weather and crops. Wait a second. Thor, the angry storm god associated with thunder and lightning, is also associated with good weather and good crops. Remember that part specifically because I'm going to come back to it, but on to the next source. There's one called Duo of Saint Quentin, who was a French historian in the 900s, and he wrote about the Normans, the Vikings who were actually pagan for a couple generations after moving to France, contrary to popular belief. They would remain pagan for quite some time, but here in this source it's written about a sacrifice to Thor. It doesn't say for what purpose, but it was around the midwinter time, so we're pretty sure that they're talking about Yule. And remember, Yule is usually the time to offer for a good harvest for the coming year. Freya is usually the one offered to for a good harvest, of course, but Thor is also closely related with good harvest, as he is, the storm god, and he, brings the rain and life into the crops, a little bit like that. Third source, a very reliable old source called Lanamabuk. It's about the settlement of Iceland. Here it speaks about a blut, like a big boulder, so a blutstone, where the backs of sacrifices, human and animal, were broken as sacrifices to Thor. It doesn't say exactly why, except that it was done to appease Thor and, rid the community of guilt, kind of, in this source. It's almost written like it was a punishment for, it was like a death sentence at the Althing in Iceland if they had a person or some criminals that were offending Thor with their bad actions. So then the people got together and sacrificed that person in order to appease Thor. I don't know how accurate that one is. Nothing really similar is written about in any of the other sources like that, and I don't like that idea either, that makes it sound like there's a big god in the sky watching over us, getting angry at you, and then you have to give a sacrifice to make your god happy again. this is a very monotheistic idea, and it's not something we really find in any pagan religions around the world. We find those types of things sometimes in the late stages of paganism, when the pagan religion is already influenced by monotheism, but it's not something that we find in the true, tribal original pagan religions. But whatever, believe whatever you want on that source. I'll go on to the next one. Tacitus, Germania, very famous one, a Roman historian writing about the Germanic tribes, and this is about 700 years before the Viking Age, but the religion was the same. It was a more earlier, pure version of the religion, but it was the same. And he writes here that they sung songs for Hercules before going into battle. Now, Hercules is the equivalent to Roman Jupiter and Germanic Thor, as most of you know. So there are a few very, very old sources referred to as Interpretatio Germania that speak about this. Basically, when the Romans were writing about foreign gods, they would use their own equivalents, names for them. So, of course, the Germanic tribes singing songs about Hercules. In this Roman source, it would mean that they're singing songs to Thor and invoking him before entering battle. Now, we also have many records of Odin and Tyr being invoked for success in battle. But for different reasons, though. I remember Odin was kind of to bring the war spirit and the frenzy into the men for battle. Tyr, it was more associated with victory and bravery even. Then Thor brings protection and good health, as you're going to keep on seeing. On to the next sources. Now, these are very important. They're the runic inscriptions. I've gone over some of the sagas, but like I said, a lot of these are written by Christians who don't understand the religion, and they're written later on in time. But the runic inscriptions were written by pagans in pagan times, and this is actually what I'm writing my book on, so I'm really involved in the research of this right now. But there are about 10 to 20 archaeological finds of inscriptions invoking Thor. These come in amulets, rune sticks, brecteates, pendants, bones, rune stones, all things like that. I don't have time to go over all of them, but here are a few. One is the Kvinnebi amulet, basically writing a protection charm for someone named Berfi. Another one is the Sigtuna amulet, which invokes Thor to get rid of a boil or a fever. Another is the Canterbury charm, which invokes Thor to help with a wound or like blood vessel pus, as you can see here. Pretty gross. We have another one called the Bergen rune stick B380, and that's interpreted as a protection amulet, basically asking Thor to receive you. So there are lots of these. Like I said, I don't have time to go over them all, but keep an eye out for my book. It should be ready early next year. It basically is going to go over all the records and archaeological finds that we have of inscriptions involving the Norse gods, which will give us a really good idea of what they actually represent and why they were worshipped. But for now, just remember again, Thor is always coming up invoked for health and protection in almost all of those, and those are the most reliable ones that we have. We do find a couple different things, though, in some rune stones. We find about 5 rune stones in Denmark and Sweden that have like carving of the runes on the stone. It's usually to honor a dead person, who has died, and the rune stone is honoring their life. And then at the end of the text, it says, "May Thor bless the runes." So basically, this is a way of sanctifying the rune stone and the runes that were written, making it holy, giving the words power. There are also about 5 more rune stones with an identical structure, kind of honoring a dead person, but they don't have "May Thor bless the runes" here. They just has Thor's hammer carved in it. So Thor may have had some, function of like consecrating runes that were carved, giving the words power, basically. Just keep in mind that there are only about 10 rune stones that show this, but there are thousands of rune stones carved everywhere that really have no mention of Thor, so, do with that info what you want. But yeah, it might maybe seem like Thor's function was possibly to have to do with honoring a dead loved one, something like that, but who knows. One of the last ones I'll go over is Bronze Age rock art. We can speak about a couple of those rock carvings. We find two. I wasn't able to find any photos of these, but I'm writing down what they're called right here. And it's basically, they think it's Thor and his hammer depicted. And then these are very old, by the way, Bronze Age, long before the Viking Age, which is one of the many reasons why we know the myths about Thor are much older than the actual written sources we have of Thor. But these scenes in the rock art, like I said, I don't have a photo, but I'll put some information up here, and they are usually interpreted as a marriage ceremony, and that's when Thor's hammer is coming out to bless the marriage. We know this also from a couple examples that this was actually done by humans to bless a marriage, just like it was done in the poetic Edda poem Þrimskvida, where they pulled out the hammer before the marriage to bless it. And then it's also done to bless a childbirth, so this was definitely a very real ritual involving Thor and his hammer. Now, remember what Thor's hammer is. If Thor is, you know, the life force and the energy and protection, protectional barrier of all living things, Thor's hammer is the driving force behind that. And humans are animals, that's the heart or the heartbeat. That's what Mjölnir is and what it represents in the myth. So it makes sense that the hammer is brought out at marriage and at birth to give that baby, you know, that's about to be conceived, a driving power towards life. Again, Thor being associated with health and protection. And remember, our view of marriage today is very different than it was 1,000 years ago. Today we get married because of fairy tale love and Disney movies and cuddly stuff, and even financial and legal reasons people get married. But before in history, you got married to make babies. Okay, and love had nothing to do with it. In fact, most of the time people didn't even meet each other before they made sure they were going to get married. They just made sure that they were going to be from a good family so they could make good babies, and like a good union between the family. You might have met your future bride once or twice before you got married. So marriage was to create new life. There was no other reason for marriage. Anything else is just our modern minds kind of forcing these narratives on history, like, oh no, marriage is about love and commitment, and you don't need a baby if you're going to get married. You don't have to get pregnant. Well, yeah, good luck telling that to any human who ever existed before birth control about 70 years ago. So it makes sense that Thor and Thor's hammer was invoked at marriages and birth. It's to give that driving power and health and the life that's about to be created, like exactly that first night. They wouldn't be having sex before marriage, so they'd do it the first time that night. So that, at first glance, it may be, you know, strange to see how Thor and Thor's hammer is invoked at a marriage, but really it makes perfect sense. One final thing I'll speak about in the sources is the folk tradition, actually. All the way up until the 1800s, all over Scandinavia and even as far south as Germany, Thursday, or aka Thor's Day, was known as a day where more powerful was available to do the rituals and traditions. We find hundreds of examples of spell books with certain rituals or practices instructing the act to be done specifically on a Thursday. Also, all over the Germanic world, weddings were actually preferred to be done on a Thursday. Long into Christian times, this is all the way up until the 1800s, so we can maybe count that just this act of doing thing on a Thursday is an invocation of Thor in some way, and these spells and weddings, they didn't know that back then, but it was a much older pagan tradition to do it on Thor's Day. I'll give you one final source that's a bit different. The vast majority of sources, again, show how Thor was called upon for good health, protection, and even good health and protection for crops and famine. But in Lanamabuk, we have a story about a man named Hercules that called for Thor's protection while in a storm sailing to Iceland. It makes sense. Thor, one of his functions is, of course, the storm god. But also in this same source, it was a tradition to kind of invoke Thor for protection when finding a place to settle in Iceland. They wrote that there was a very popular tradition that Norwegians would bring pillars with them on the journey in their ships, carve a picture of Thor, and then when they approached Iceland, they would throw the pillars out into the ocean, and wherever that floated to and landed, that was where they were going to decide to settle. That's very similar to account in Egil Saga, where they let the coffin of the grandfather Kvedlulf, who died on the journey, they let that float to land in Iceland, and that's where they built their farm, wherever that was going to land. So I don't know, that just seems like kind of a superstitious tradition rather than an example of worship of Thor, but I thought I'd include that just to add a final function. Thor being invoked as kind of protection and guidance on a journey and settlement in a new land. So those are the sources. That's a long video already. You can believe whatever you want, but I'll give my thoughts just so you guys have something to work with. But these are just my thoughts. Again, watch my video on the theories about Thor, because if you haven't seen that, what I'm about to say is not going to make much sense. It's going to sound like I'm making up some bullshit out of nowhere, but you know, historians have been kind of on this path for the past 200 years now. I'm just kind of connecting all their theories together. So think of Thor as the protective energy in all living things. People, plants, animals, even the world as a whole. Remember, in animist beliefs, like we all come from, nothing is different. Every object is the same. It has some sort of life and spirit to it. So the earth, this is very clear in some of the myths. The Thor represents the electromagnetic field of the earth. It protects the earth from the harmful forces of Utgard and outer space. And that's why Thor is also associated with thunder, because this atmosphere, the surrounding like barrier of the earth, that's where the thunder and the lightning forms. But Thor is also associated with pleasant weather, remember, isn't he? Remember what I said earlier. The energy of Thor does not only have to be with violence and thunder and storms, it has to do with general good energy, bringing good health to the crops and the planet. This is the way Thor functions for the earth as a whole, but on a smaller scale, Thor is the energy that surrounds us and all living things. Just like the electromagnetic field of the earth, we humans have an electromagnetic field. In Eastern belief, you can maybe call this the aura. Now, the aura is not equally strong in everyone. If you are unhealthy, weak. If you have negative energy, your aura is going to be weak. But if you are strong, healthy, protected, it means your aura is strong. So this is the purpose of worshipping Thor, it seems like from the sources. When you sacrifice to Thor, or pray to him, or sing his name before going to battle, the protective energy around our bodies, our aura, is going to get stronger, and then we can fight off bad health easier, and we will be protected from harm easier. The protective, healthy energy around the atmosphere and the electromagnetic field, that's how Thor works on the massive scale. Making a strong, healthy electromagnetic field protects the earth from the outside forces, but it also makes the earth healthier, making things grow better, making there be storms, rain, all things like that, and good weather, remember. Thor, it looks like also from the sources, you can get a protective driving kickstarts of this energy when you're making a baby and creating life. It seems like you can also use Thor as kind of like to give power and energy to inanimate objects like the rune stones that I spoke about. Remember, in animism, there are no inanimate objects. Even this rock with runes carved on it is believed to have some sort of spiritual energy to it. So I don't know, whatever, those are my thoughts. Simply that Thor is the protective energy around all living things that are associated with health, life, strength, and it protects us. And by worshipping Thor in the various different ways, we can strengthen this protective energy around us, making us healthier and more protected, just like Thor's function is. But I don't know, that's just my beliefs. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I would love to hear. We can all work together and share ideas. These are all interpretations at the end of the day. We don't have ancient sources to speak about this. Those are all lost. Yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. Vi ses nästa gång.